Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? It is the 19th of September, 2022. This is David Nguyen, your Sophos product manager here at Bluechip Infotech. Proud to be presenting to you another webinar. We're at it again. This time we're talking about XDR, okay? But just before we do that, I've got some special guests to introduce, okay? We've got Mr. Bryan Ballard, the sales engineer from Sophos, the man, the legend himself. Bryan, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you for that introduction.
No, it's awesome to have you here. It's good. We need your expertise in seeing what's going on inside of this marketplace, especially concerning, the really big topic of threat hunting, especially when it concerns the EDR or XDR or anything like that. So I would love to have the content from you, and thank you for joining us once again. Cool. Just before we start off and make sure that everything is good to go, while we wait for a few people, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping. Keeping it's the general stuff. It is. You guys got a question and answer panel right there. You don't have to use it for just questions and answers. Say hi. Let me know how you guys are doing. Let me know how your day is while we wait for some more attendees to join. We will start on the 5-minute mark. All right. Break some rules. Just write some stuff about your day. I would love to hear it. But while we're waiting, I might as well just let you guys know and have a quick news broadcast out there that Uber has been hacked again. Just get some cybersecurity news out there for anyone who hasn't kept up to date. They have been hacked again. That's right. Uber, our famous ride sharing company, food delivery company, has been hacked, and it's the hack or the extent of the hack is still being fully realized. People are still investigating, but as far as we know, it was a full compromise, right? It was a full compromise. They gained access to PowerShell. It was apparently an 18-year-old who announced it on their company's internal Slack channel. And how they did it? Good question. They used another social engineering, another strategy. They used MFA fatigue, actually, where they impersonated an IT administrator. And then, of course, from there, kept sending and spamming these MFA notifications to an employee, and eventually getting access from that after saying, hey, this will stop if you just approve, this MFA login. They managed to gain access to PowerShell, all the administrative scripts. It's basically a gold mine. So, in fact, I would recommend removing your payment details if you have them on Uber right now. I know people might say, oh, it's a bit too late, but in honesty, that we don't know the extent of what they can access, or rather, when they can access. If they still have access, they probably had access for a while before announcing that they did. And if anyone remembers their recent, their debacle of being hacked back in 2016, where they handled it really badly, I believe the cybersecurity expert on board, had to basically resign, was let go because they paid a ransom of 100 grand back then, and they hid it for a whole year before announcing it to the public. So just some wild times right there. So look out for that and the stories behind that, and be careful, because there's a lot happening in the space right now, and it's not just small hacks. It's Uber's a big one, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, any other kind of crazy news you've heard, Bryan, or anything else you want to share just before we kick off?
Look, that was interesting what you shared with me with the Uber from the MFA side of things. That's definitely front and center from an attack vector. Even we've sort of had that as one of those training modules for enabling users to just understand that, if you're getting an MFA push or some form of it, be a text message, be it a push from your device, don't just willy-nilly go and say, yep, allow it, if you don't know where it's come from. And really, I think the turnkey is to actually notify anyone within the organizations where you've got that. The MFA is there to stop someone getting in from that. And in this situation, in the fatigue aspect, the person let them in. And this has become what we've told about, sort of like, the security or the adversary evolving to these as a service. So in this instance, sounds like a bit of a individual hack as a proof of concept to say what I've done. Look at me, I've gotten into a pretty decent sized next gen company from that side, but equally so, there are adversaries that are focused on what we'd label as cookie stealing from that side. And even Emotet is come along to be doing that, to do that scrape, because if you can get hold of those cookies to go and say you're pre-authenticated, that's an aspect from an adversary to go and say, well, I don't have to necessarily get in from the device that I've got command control. I can use another form from that. So yeah, interesting insight.
No, and absolutely, Brian. It's you know, it's a wild word out there. So everyone, you know, the training modules, and you guys might roll your eyes at corporate compliance and all these training modules, but they really do have a point. Don't give up your MFA to everyone. Social engineering is as powerful as, you know, it's even more powerful than the traditional brute forcing your way into things, simply because, you know, humans, rather users, are probably the if they're not trained, are the lowest point, the lowest common denominator to attack in the case that, you know, they're not wary of it. In this case, the MFA must have seemed like, the MFA fatigue and the constant spam must have seemed like an error. Why is this constantly happening to me? But there was definitely a malicious intent behind that. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed that little bit of news, and make sure to look out for more in the future. We'll be reporting to you whenever we have a webinar, so stay tuned. But it's basically just past the 5-minute mark, and, you know, let's get kick-started. We have a lot of content from Brian here in order to show us the practical how-tos of XDR, a really hot topic in threat hunting right now, how to start it yourself, or how, if you're going to do it yourself, or creating a SOC for your team. So without stealing his thunder, let's continue onwards with the presentation. I am just going to switch the slides right here, and let's get kicked off. All right, just a bit of a housekeeping. There is a Q&A panel, okay? So make sure you put your questions there. If there's anything complex, we'll put it, you know, there is Q&A time at the end. We'll be addressing those concerns after the demos and after all the content and presentations. So, you know, make yourself known out there if you have any questions. And yeah, without further ado, let's get started with the XDR top reasons. Brian, it is over to you, sir. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks, David. And thank you, David, for sort of organising this to actually do something quite practical for the audience today, to actually go through and sort of show how the Sophos Central Console operates for you to potentially go and use the tools of XDR to do some form of threat hunting. And that's really what we're going to do today from that side. But if you want to flick to the next slide, we'll just sort of go through as a summary to sort of say, what do we need to look at, or what are we providing through that from that side? So what I'm going to try and show you today is the ability to report on your posture, and I'll go and show that basically as a security incident to validate what you need to do from that side of things. Further to that, if you go to the next point, is identify if what Sophos has picked up, is there telemetry from the telemetry that we're looking at? Is there aspects that have been unnoticed? So expanding the footprint to go and say, okay, what's there and what has happened in your environment. Going to the next point, David, so having the tools there to respond faster to those potential incidences. So I'll show you how that looks like through Sophos Central, or give a discussion through the live response, through the isolation, as well as, you know, using the ability to go and curate and orchestrate blacklisting from that side of things. Using the enrichment data to get additional telemetry on what we're looking at, so you can validate what is seen and not just be using your insight to go and say, what's here, what does it mean from that side, as well as Sophos Threat Labs intelligence. And then lastly, number 5 is, you know, getting that full root cause, what I like to call root cause, identifying how the attack actually began on that side. And obviously we'll see this through the Threat Analysis Center, but I'll show you how that can be seen quite visually in a text form through the Live Discover from that. So getting away from the PowerPoint, I'm going to request access to be able to show my screen.
All right, I'm going to shoot it over to you, Brian, so that you can show the live demo of XDR and basically how we go around threat hunting. Thank you so much. I'll be turning on the camera so that everyone can focus on the screen, and I hope we can learn a lot, so thank you.
Fantastic. So hopefully this is all visual from what I can see, what everyone can see from this side, but what I've gone into is actually a threat graph. So actually an incident as an example. And why I'm doing this is to say, well, yes, Intercept X is there to protect you, and Intercept X is there to basically detect malicious activity and clean those activities. Do understand in this example here, I'm using a console where it's been set to monitor mode, so it is purposely set to not clean. But what we're showing here is malicious that has been detected and ideally has been clean. But what I'm going to go through is actually use the threat graph below and sort of use a bit of the telemetry to pivot ourselves to Live Discover for further investigations. So if we look down the bottom, we've got the Outlook process on that side, doing a number of calls, which is all quite acceptable. But what we can see is the first piece, and here is an opening of a document. So we're using a Delta flight itinerary that someone has opened. This is something I'm going to take in my notes to go and look at further on. Obviously, with the document that's been opened, WinWord has been executed, and that's all expected from what we're seeing here. But what is particular interest is the spawning of the HTML application as the next process. So if we sort of click, we can sort of see it's done an IP connection. And here we can see an IP that has been connected from this process here. So that's another piece of threat intel that I'm going to do a bit of a lookup through. Additionally, we've got a URL, and here we've got a URL of a Netflix with a double I. That's additional information that I'm probably going to go and expand to see if other devices are talking to these IP addresses or these URLs. As we can sort of see, this HTML has launched a command processor. So we can sort of see what it's actually launched from there. So it's actually launching PowerShell. We can also then see through PowerShell, it has launched additional processes. And in here, if we can look at the command line, we can actually see that what's been actually launched is what we label as obfuscated code or obfuscated scripting. We can take that information if we so desire and copy that, and we can go through a process to decode to say that's the case. I'm not going to do that today, but do understand this is the power of the threat graph that you're already sort of familiar with from InterceptX. But then if we sort of continue on the bouncing ball, we can see that additional codes have come up. And as we sort of get towards the beacon event, we can see that additional IP addresses has connected. And that same IP address that we saw at the beginning has actually spawned here. So in this situation, we could say, well, what is our next steps? So here, ideally, if we're in a clean state, we can sort of say, okay, cool, let's move on and look at the whole aspect. But because we're in a not clean state, we can go and say, well, we probably want to isolate this computer. So one of the features of XDR is the ability to isolate on demand. And what this means is basically, I'd sort of describe this as virtually unplugging the device from the network. It still talks to Sophos Central. You do have the ability to set up specific exclusions if there's particular IP addresses that you wanted to connect to from a remote management RMM process on that side. But really the key aspect is that any untrusted or unknown processes or IP addresses are going to be severed. It's a very powerful tool to sort of say as a playbook to go and disconnect that device. Obviously that is intrusive to the user, so you would be wanting to do some form of notification. It does notify the user, but if they've missed it, they may be wondering why can they not connect to the internet. I'm not going to do that today. What I'm going to do is pivot across to the Live Discover. And this is one of the fundamental functionalities in XDR that's available in the Threat Analysis Center through here. So with the Live Discover, this is basically asking the question across your environment, what is available? What do I want to know about in my environment? So you are taking the tools and you are asking Sophos, is this information aligned to this? Now with the Live Discover, we have the ability to query the data lake, which is Sophos Central itself. So endpoints, servers, and if you've got other Sophos products such as email, firewall, mobile, even cloud optics, you can go and get that broad picture. And that's why we talk about XDR being extended detection and response from that side. If you do want to, you can pivot to query the endpoints directly and actually ask the question specifically. But generally speaking, because we're at the moment, we're doing what I call a bit of a threat hunt, we're going to just focus on the data lake. And what I'm going to do as my first playbook is actually go and use that IP address and look across my ecosystem to see if additional computers have connected on. And so I've got the IP address as my lookup. I'm going to set my time period for 30 days because this attack is some time ago. Normally speaking, the default 24 hours would be a sufficient process. But in this situation, what I'm showing today is something that's been pre-prepared. So I'm using that 30 days. So what I've got here now as the answer is 2 devices and processes that are talking to this IP address from here. And so I'm going to focus on this additional computer, Win10.5. If I go back very briefly to the previous one, it's Win10.1 that is what's in the threat analysis center. So in this case, we've got an additional computer that we want to potentially pivot to identify why they've actually connected on through that. But before I do that, I'm going to use one of the features with the Live Discover and what I talked about, enrichment. So I've now got the IP address here, and I'm going to go and actually use an enrichment tool to go and do a lookup to say, what is this IP address? It's something that I'm familiar with. So I'm going to go and ask, using domain tools, who is it? And as we can see here, this is actually residing outside of Australia. And if we look a little closer, it does actually reside at KPTC, actually is a Korean postal telecommunications. So it's actually a North Korean IP address from that side that we've got here in a simulated attack. You know, depending on the company or the organization, straight away where this geographic locations probably would be the, you know, a circle of concern. But what we're going to do is saying, okay, we've now got this IP address. I'm going to look at these processes that had run with this computer. And I can see that I've got additionally the MSHTA that's run. And I can see that this MSHTA has done the similar launcher that we showed before, the Netflix.com launcher. So this one's probably the process I'm going to look at a bit closer. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get the process ID, which is aligned here. So what the process ID, or what we call here is, Sophos process ID, is the individual process that's actually been run on this computer. So every process is unique. So this is giving us a curation or a pivot point to narrow what we're looking into. And the reason I'm going to do this is I want to go and get a bit of what's called a process tree. So I want to get a visual as to how this process is spawned, what actually made this process launch from here. So I'm going to do that by going to one of my playbooks, which is number 2. So here I'm doing Live Discover again. And in this instance, what we've done is going to another canned, what I call a pre-created query or canned query. But here we've taken that process ID and it's been pre-populated. So I haven't had to copy and paste as a pivot point. The information's there already for me. Because we know the device, we don't need to get a device from the wildcard because we're focused on the process ID. I run this, and what this is going to do is give me a bit of a, what I like to call a text visual as to how this process actually ran and what it also ran after the fact. So when it comes up, we can see from a historic perspective, we can see that basically we can follow that bouncing ball to say, okay, computer's logged on, computer's gone to Explorer, Outlook was executed, and then we can see WinWord was executed. Now, if we look a little closer, we can see within WinWord, or Microsoft Word, that same file, that Delta flight itinerary that I saw before, is launched. So we've now really joined the dots to say that Win5 and Win1 have been compromised by the same document through here from that side. And also we can sort of look at a bit closer to say, okay, well, WinWord has run. Here's the launcher that we saw. So this is the process ID that we've basically gone across to. And then we can also see what the next step of the process is. So that same obfuscated code has been run. PowerShell has been run. But if we sort of follow a bit further, we can sort of see, well, it hasn't gone to full fruition to encrypt on that side. So that's why it hasn't popped up in the threat analysis center or a threat graph as malicious activity. Further to this, with the enrichment data, in this lookup, we've got what's called the MITRE ATT&CK framework aligned here. So what this aligns to is basically what I would like to sort of summarize as suspicious activity to where an adversary could be using this launcher. Now, the key challenge with what an adversary is doing generally aligns to what a potential system administrator is also doing to maintain a system from that side. But the question aligns to, is this you, the IT, the MSP, or the system administrator, or is this someone that is not up to any good? And that's where we've got these MITRE ATT&CK frameworks to highlight, to say, okay, well, this has got a bit of an execution. This has got an evasion aspect on that side. We're highlighting that as an additional piece of enrichment. But we can kind of summarize what we've seen so far. This computer is also compromised. And we could say from a playbook step to say, okay, maybe this computer we should be isolating from there, but I'm not going to go down that path just yet. What we probably can do as an additional step is go and either do 2 additional lookups. Now that we've validated that the file is the culprit, we can use a lookup to say, okay, let's go and look at Sophos Central and look at the data lake in email and see which people received this file as a pivot point from that. Now, in this case, this file is not gone through email from that side, so it doesn't pop up from that aspect. But additionally, that can be a circle point if you've got Sophos email connected to XDR. But on top of that, that doesn't really answer the question to say, okay, we've now got 3, 4, 5 people that received that email. We want to actually validate to say, okay, did they actually open that document? So we talk about the, I guess that MFA fatigue where password compromise occurred before. We want to actually validate which people have opened this document. So we're actually going to use a document lookup to see if anyone else has opened this document. And when this comes up, this server aligns to validating that only the Win5 device, I believe, comes through. And so that's okay. So we've circled Win1 and we've circled Win5. Additionally, from an orchestration perspective, we can say, well, this IP address that's been popping up, we probably want to do a bit of a global block list of that. And we can do that through either the central management of the firewall and add that to a block list. We can also add that IP address to a block IP in Sophos Central for the endpoints from that. But do understand from the endpoints that aligns to web traffic. So the MSTH aspect would be blocked, but if there was unrelated web traffic, which I'll show you shortly in another form, that won't necessarily be blocked through that web lookup from that side. And so this is my first example of using threat intel from a previous threat case to validate your security posture from that. I'm going to go and do a new query. And this is actually going to be aligned to what I call your hygiene aspect. And what I mean by that is, in this instance, we're going to be looking for what we could label as log4j. So if you recall last year, there was a bit of a vulnerability from the patchy side of things within Java. And unlike previous vulnerabilities and patching that was pretty linear to say, okay, this server or these computers have this vulnerability, we need to patch, we need to validate. There's a bit of a question mark as to what devices were susceptible to this vulnerability, because the log4j aspect was somewhat baked into lots and lots of tools. And what we're doing here as our first step is to go and say, okay, can we see what devices are susceptible to this at a Java level from that side? So we've got this not necessarily canned query, but a query that's available through the communities that identifies, is Java running in my state? In this instance, we've got Java running on a couple of devices, but in lots of instances. So I'm not going to use this as my pivot point. I'm actually going to go to a different investigation, to a refined one, where it's going to remove basically the non-necessary log4j vulnerabilities, but more so the Java updates. We don't need to worry about that. And in this instance, we've got a bit more refinement, and we can sort of pivot ourselves to the file server on that side. And so here we've got the Java process. So here as a circle point, we can basically say, okay, we can see Java is running on this server. So we want to take the next step to identify, okay, log4j, does this need to be patched? What is the Java instance that's on this computer? So from a IT operations into what is my security posture, we've got that point of fork to say, what is our next step? However, when we sort of do a little closer look up to this, we can see Java running. We can see the command line that this has actually launched a Java file, so a Spring Boot file on that side, and that's now moved towards to saying, okay, maybe this computer is already going through some form of compromise, because we actually don't know what this Spring Boot file that's residing and why this is being launched through here. So this is what we're going to be pivoting to go and say, okay, let's go and look at this particular process and get a similar process tree on there. So we're going to go and do a lookup on this Java process, and we're going to go and do the Java process tree. So we're actually going to get this same process tree that we saw previously with the previous threat hunt to just understand how this process had been executed and what it's actually doing. So again, we're going to do a query over the last 30 days. We'll let that run. And this is going to again give us a similar view to saying how the computer operated. So we've got that sort of boot up process that we can see. But what's good now is we can see that this is the Spring Boot, but now we can see what's actually been executed after the fact that isn't Java related. And it's actually now PowerShell related and aligns to saying, well, this is actually going to a call to home. So it's going to sophostest.com. So this is sort of almost in line to saying proof of concept that we've been able to validate exploiting this Java process. And we can see that it's done that a couple of times. So really what I would be saying our next step is to saying, well, who's talking to that process from that? So again, we're going to go to that process ID. And in this case, we're going to go and look for the IP addresses that's connected through there. So let's go to the network connections for the java.exe process. Again, we've got the process ID already pre-populated. I'm going to change the view to 30 days and let that run. And we're just going to see what IP addresses that it's connecting to. And when that pops up, I think we should be seeing this popping up with a fairly familiar IP address. If I scroll to the right, and here we go. So we've got that 210 IP address coming up, and we can see additionally from a report that we've got a simulated web connection. We've also got a simulated LDAP, so 1389 or think of 389 connecting from this remote IP. So we could do that same enrichment that we did before. If I do, it's going to go and give us the same information that I showed before on that side, because it is the same IP from a simulated campaign aspect. But what we've got now is that additional telemetry to say, okay, well, what is our next steps? Not only are we wanting to patch this system, but we're probably going to want to do some port blocking and limit the internet access for this device. And again, do the IP address to go and, block this IP address from this side. Do understand when we're doing IP block listing, that's not going to really defeat the purpose. It's just think of it as a temporary measure. But at least then if you've got unprotected devices that are being connected, they'll at least be disconnected and obviously disrupt in that attack chain from there. And really with this additional telemetry, we could do that lookup to say, let's go and look at the firewall in the environment and see what other devices are connected through here. So using an example of vulnerability status and looking at the vulnerability status and looking at those processes, we've identified another threat through this. And this all resides through Live Discover. Now, the next one I want to show you is a different feature outside of Live Discover. And this is actually what's called detections in Sophos Central. So devices being endpoints, servers, as well as your email, as well as Cloud Optics, are basically curating their data into the data lake in Sophos Central. And so as you're already familiar with from an Intercept X protection piece, if we know that it's malicious, we will stop it on that side. But what we're doing here with the detections is going through that similar AI modeling and giving more front and center to you in a manner of speaking on the risk level, what we think you should be looking at from that side. And so what I've created here is a filter to just look for all medium risk factors as to running in my environment from that side. Because I was being a bit naughty last week and I was doing some simulated attack campaigns from that side. So this is spawned not malicious activities, but suspicious activities through here. And so what we've got here is some persistence through logon scripts. And if I expand that, I can see, okay, this is actually running the particular command through here. So when it pops up, we can see, okay, so here it's doing the logon script. And it also looks like it's trying to do a bit of a dump, a password dump through here. So in this instance, my next step could be to go and say, okay, well, maybe I want to go and get that process tree that I saw before. And so I've already got that ability where I've got the process, the parent process ID. So I can do this pivot point through detections to live discover. So go and do that process tree for the process ID and get that to run to see what is happening or why this process actually ran in the first place. So getting that origin perspective. Put the wildcard in. In this case, I was doing this last week, so I don't need to do the 30-day lookup. And what I'll see here is probably a bit of a bigger piece in what I was actually doing, where I was actually running an APT simulator. And I'll actually see additional processes occurring. So again, I've got that root cause, you know, where it's coming on from a PowerShell or computer boot up on that side. Here I've got the PowerShell launching. Here I've got the command line where I was actually running the command from basically attack me scenario. Pretty boring, I apologize. Don't like to do the sophisticated attacks. I just want to get the noise generated. But here I'm seeing all the attack simulations occurring step by step that was being run and trying to create as much noise from a detection piece. And you can see that we're aligning to saying, okay, this is actually occurring. So this is doing an unzip. It's trying to do a PowerShell run. We've got scheduled tasks. Now, scheduled tasks would sort of pop up as a low variable. So if I was to change my filter in the detections, we would see this popping up here. So I've got additional aspects coming through and continuing on bit by bit by bit that's occurring with this attack. So I've got a good process tree as to what has actually happened, why that registry occurred, and where it actually originated. So I can see it's all running from the CTEMP APT simulator. So that would be probably my next step if I was to sort of say, well, incident response, not just going to the computer and isolating that computer and also seeing additional computers being compromised on that side. I'll be able to go and actually use the live response and go looking for that process, looking for that APT process and actually going and deleting that process here. Further to that, I've got additional examples where I've got unverified or suspicious files running. So here I've got an SVC host and I've got an NBT scan that is running. So with this, I can actually go and use the threat graph functionality that I was using before as known attack to get what I call as threat intelligence from Sophos. So I'm going to go and request that threat graph, and when that comes up, we'll go and have a closer look at that from that side. So we can see also where this file actually resides. So svc host.exe in C uses public doesn't look quite right to me. So what I might also do is, from an enrichment perspective, is use the SHA and actually go and do a virus total lookup. And this will also give me a bit of telemetry to say, okay, well, how trusted or untrusted is this file? And what I'm taking away here, other than the fact that it's very much a benign through the threat landscape, is the file is actually not svc host, it's actually a different file, srv ani as a file from that side. So that's my curation point to go and say, okay, why is this file actually executing here on that side? Again, from a pivot point, I can use that. As I showed before, I'm going to get threat graph to generate to give me some telemetry as to what's going on. The same aligns if I was to do this for the NBT scan. So again, I can go and generate a threat graph for NBT scan. And we'll get that to pop up. Here, that's more interesting is that this is aligned to suspicious files. So we've got this clearly as in that red or in that orange area from that side. We can also do that virus total lookup to see what this files comes up, and we can survey use as a lookup to see, okay, what this aligns to. And we can see that other providers have sort of thrown this into what I would call into the PUA actor from that side. So where we've got this under in the trusted aspect, this would probably align as some form of application control where we can potentially go and try and block that file because we sort of are rare of it, but we haven't identified it truly as that PUA. But we've highlighted it that it's part of the threat landscape from a MITRE attack to say that this is doing a service scan, a discovery network service scan. So we're telling you about this on that. So you've got this threat intel that's happening to you that you can use as your curations for your next step. And then lastly, what I've got here is also some what we call persistence. And this is, if we go and expand this from a persistence perspective, this is very, very clever, but quite boring command lines. So actually adding the administrators group to the guest account. So from a command perspective, we're getting persistence by actually creating the guest account or using the guest account and adding it to the administrators group. So instead of having to create a new account or get a password, because we're already in an elevated process, we're actually going to use that. And we can see that's been run a number of times on the two computers. We can also see, if we go through this other one, that the guest account has also been enabled from that. So it's not just simply enable the guest account from that aspect. We've got this, enabled from that aspect. So all this aligns to detections, and I can sort of use this as my pivot point to create an investigation. So I could go and take these examples I've gone through from a reg process. I can use the MBT scan, the SVC host, the users. Is of those I've gone through very quickly, those are of particular interest. And I can actually go and create a new investigation. And I can give that a name and go and say XDR demo and create an investigation. The benefit of doing that is I can now go back and I can create my notes. And if other things of interest, for instance, if I wanted to go and say, maybe I've decided that this one up here is of interest, I can add that if I want to add that to that investigation. So I've got that there and I can add it to it. So I'm basically creating my own investigation case, which I can click into and I can click back into, and it's got everything that I've put in. So think of it as a ticket creation. I can mark it to in progress, on hold, archive. I can assign it to users. So I can assign it to myself or my colleague Yasha or Will Riker, number one, from that side. And I can also be making notes. I can obviously say, well, something funny on Thursday night. And also on top of that is we've got the full investigation notes that aligns to what we call the OODA loop, which is what the MTR team are doing as the investigative framework. And this is templated, and you can basically use this as your clearly Q&A to say, okay, what have we observed? Is there external IP addresses? Is there particular ports being used? What's the internal connections? Is any auto runs occurred where we've picked up the registry for start run and scheduled tasks? So we've picked up some auto runs from that side. We can align that to the MITRE attack framework. So we can say, okay, well, these clearly align to persistence and discovery and so forth. How often is it happening? Well, it's not all happened on that particular Thursday time. And what is our decision? So what have we decided? What have we observed? What are we going to decide on? And what is our actions? And that is how the MTR team are operating. And if they come inconclusive, it goes back to the top, get more telemetry. So we might pivot to the endpoint and get more processes aligned on the actual devices in question. Or our decision is to take action, and we might be isolating that computer and running a scan, running a cleanup, or going to the command application control to see if we can block that through that. And that kind of aligns to the main examples that I wanted to show you. The last thing I want to show you is the threat graphs that I created before on that side. So looks like they're still in progress, but I did create a couple just for examples. And this is basically the the Sophos or the admin generated threat graphs. All I want to show you here is that it's given us the back process to see what had happened. So we can see that 7-zip is in question from that side. We can see from the command line that that was used to expand the process, the SVC host on there. We also have SVC host where we can get what's called the the Sophos threat intelligence. So if we want to request latest intelligence, we can request that. But again, this has already been created. We can see where this aligns to. It's got the AV details. It's got machine learning analytics. So it's saying, well, what's there that's potentially suspicious? What's there from a code similarity? And if we wanted to, and if this was an uncertain file or unreputable file, we could do that click, clean and block. So another form of ability to go and say, okay, let's go and block this file across the whole estate. Or if we want to, we can go and do that isolate from here. Or alternatively, we could go to the computers or computers in question and isolate those computers or do a live response from that side. And that kind of wraps up what I wanted to show you from a presentation perspective. So I'm going to try and change presenter back to David just to revisit what we've discussed.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bryan. Let's revisit exactly what we've discussed. And that was super insightful, actually. A very, very powerful tool that allows you to do everything you need to do in the case of, you were encountering malicious activity. But, I've just put the screen up again just so that we can, consider XDR in the case that you guys can see that. Let's recap. Okay, Bryan?
Yeah, awesome. So we've been able to do a couple of reports on the security posture. So I was able to go and use the threat graph and validate, are we actually protected or have we actually cleaned up that threat? So I took some of the takeaways that we saw before, that IP addresses and Netflix, and I did lookups to see, okay, do we see this threat actually fully resolved? Or is the threat going unbubbled across the estate? And we found another computer that was in a compromised state through that. Further to that, that made us the ability to detect the attacks that had gone unnoticed. And also, if we take a step back and say, well, the Log4j vulnerability, that's the key IT operations. That really is about IT hygiene, that companies, organizations, and partners are really needing to sort of put a lot of time and effort into. And a lot of times where I feel there's a bit of a misnomer is that validation. So a lot of people blindly trust the patch management system to do everything. But this gives us the ability to not only maybe look for something that we're unsure of, like the Log4j, but also go and validate, okay, this is not actually patched from that side. And definitely over the last 12 months, this was used as that validator for some key vulnerability events that happened last year, where people were like, yeah, I patched, where XDR was able to say, well, no, this version is not the right version. You obviously, unfortunately, missed a step in the patching regime from that side. On top of that, we were able to pivot to see that, well, that process had been compromised, or now we saw some web shells, if we were looking at it from an exchange perspective from last year. And we've got the ability to respond. So we're able to go and isolate the computers, we're able to go and take information and search, we're able to go and add information to a block list from that side. And we had that enrichment. So we're able to go and look for information. It was like, that's pretty suspicious, let's go and do a lookup. And we were using those third parties. We're using the Whois, we're using VirusTotal as, basically validators to what we're seeing as somewhat not so sure. And on top of that, outside of the threat graph, we're able to use that process tree to see how things were propagating in an environment. So we're able to get that understanding to say, okay, this process clearly was spawned because someone launched a Word file or someone had launched something from, from command line. We had that full process tree. Even though it was less visual than the threat graph, it gave us that understanding. So that kind of wraps up to what I wanted to show you with those three examples. And I guess it comes to, is there any questions from that side? And then I guess the next steps as to, you know, where to now. So any
Yeah,
questions,
absolutely,
David?
Brian. Let's consult the Q&A. If anyone has any pressing questions or even just has some commentary that they'd like to, you know, throw down and, you know, just ask us about, so that, you know, we're here to address all the concerns and anything that you have going on inside of your mind about that particular demo, please feel free to speak up. But just some really common questions that have come through from the partner audience so far, you know, just about XDR in general. And I might start with that so that we can get our minds rolling. You know, it's just some basic ones. But if you did want to upgrade to XDR, you know, from Central Intercept X Advanced, which we all know and love, you know, is that easy? Is a lot of it? This seems like a really powerful tool. Do I need to reinstall or redeploy some kind of agent? You know.
Yeah, no, good question, and basically very easy. For, you know, the partners that are using the monthly billing, the MSP Flex, super easy. Basically self upgrades once you go and say turn on that feature from that side. So it's straightforward. The only key step that I sort of highlight to people as an afterthought is that you do need to go and enable the data lake after you've done that upgrade process. And even if you're a turn customer and you've got that upgrade key, it's very straightforward to validate that the endpoints have been upgraded to XDR on that side. It's literally all done through the Sophos Central Console. There's no redeployment or anything like that on that side.
Awesome. Oh, that's great, Brian. Thank you very much. We've got a question from the audience. We've got a question from Mr. M. You know, I won't mention them in just for privacy, but they've mentioned here a lot of similarities to CrowdStrike Falcon. Okay, and they've asked the particular question is, what kind of drivers do you need to switch to Sophos XDR if there are any? Can you make a comment on that, Brian?
So I'm not sure about, you know, I mean, I'm going to take the word drivers as to what's the compelling reason or what's the differentiators from that side. Do chuck in the chat if I've misunderstood and you're sort of saying it from a system level. But really, the key differentiator, what we lead by, is that we lead by protection as a first aspect. So a lot of the examples where people are sort of like very much EDR driven or XDR driven, you know, as a new speak from that side, is basically letting the signals curate into your SOAR, into your, you know, your data lake for you to then take action. But we're focused on ensuring that what is already deemed as malicious, and this is very much where I sort of align this to a delivery factor. So in those examples that I showed as to, you know, those were common exploits to go and compromise Word from that side. If we can stop that at a delivery point and just keep it clean, then we don't have to worry about the latitude of getting to that awful crypto scenario that we, you know, had as our proof of concept example. That is our chief differentiator, is that we do lead by protection and we do focus on ensuring that what we can protect, we will detect and we will stop it on that side. And then the XDR piece is to find that suspicious activity where something's probably missed more often, where, yes, okay, you've got that computer that's not necessarily so protected, where there should be protection layers, or not protected at all, but it's creating that noise so you are privy to saying, okay, we've identified that, so you'll be able to pick up that threat sooner from that side.
Great, so thanks, Brian. And like we said, a really powerful tool, end-to-end detection. And in the case that you guys want to respond, all the power is in your hands. And if that answered your question, Matt, you know, just feel free to leave anything or any other further commentary in the case that you wanted, you know, to follow up on that. And you know, if the conversation does get a bit longer for anyone here, oh, that's good. Yep, we got an all good signal from Mr. M there, so all good. Thanks for that, Brian. Cool. So let's move on to another one that's just been entered down here. Right, it's in terms of expertise, and this comes from a lot of our partners recently inside the space. They say that when you allude to point 4 there about adding expertise, in the case that you're not, you know, you're a layman, you know, you're not an expert right now, and it takes a while for you to get up to there. And when you search those queries, Brian, are they all in Sophos Central? You know, do I have to go seek them from somewhere else? How do I go about, you know, just getting started?
Yeah. Pretty much the vast majority of everything that I had shown today is what we label as a canned query. So something that Sophos has put in that any console will have available from that side. The little differences I did today is that I just from a pivot point, I was just using playbooks to just guide myself to saying, yep, this is the one I want to show to from that side, instead of just getting myself confused while I was doing the demo from that side. But everything was canned. The only area where things were not necessarily fully canned was the log4j, but those are not anything that's private, we're keeping our hats on. We've got a community forum in Sophos, like in communities.sophos.com. Within Inceptx, there's a query forum. And so these queries, like how do we look for a particular, look for log4j, or we need to do a lookup for exchange, for the vulnerability, those all resides there. And people have taken the power of the query engine that we have, and I've just done some amazing things. So if you sort of say one takeaway, I would go to the community site and look in there, and you'll just see some amazing examples of basically queries that are just outside from, outside to what Sophos has put in from a canned, and we validate those queries as well. And even some of those queries go and say, yep, cool, yeah, we like that, and we will sort of reincorporate that so it becomes a canned query.
Awesome. So there's a bit of collaboration from the community as well as Sophos Labs, who are already working, around the clock in order to get all the next gen threats up and running inside of the system. So that's really fascinating to hear, actually, that you guys take feedback from that community and all that. I feel like there's time for one more question, which we've gotten asked about the partner audience. But once again, if anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to place them into that questions box. I think the last one, just to finish off and get the final consensus about everything, you've shown us a really powerful tool today. And where can I learn more about XDR and threat hunting in the case that I wanted to continue along this path and get started?
Yeah, definitely. Heaps of options on that side. So for the partners and also for customers as well, they've got access to this. We've got a section within our training portal called on-demand technical training, and there's a specific module that is about XDR. And the XDR componentry does go into the Live Discover, how to configure it up, how to actually go through some of the queries from that side, and even some examples to saying how do you actually build a query if you so desire. We haven't done that today, but you've got that availability to do that from that side. Additionally, I mean, this question sort of comes up more so, well, yeah, that's great, but what do I do? And a couple of additional resources that are available is, over the last 12 to 18 months, we did a series of what we labeled as threat hunting academies. So again, you'll be able to find this in the community forums from that side, or if not, and you are super interested, reach out to David or Matt and I'll point you in the right direction. But we do have these threat hunting academies where basically our SecOps teams went through and explained the power of XDR, and they went through the process of threat hunting, doing blue team events, responding to red team side of things. So they had red teams kind of going through, well, this is what's the day in the hacker from that side, then blue team using the power of XDR to respond. And we've done basically 3 seasons of those from that side. You can jump straight to season 3. It has a bit of a summary at the start, but if you really want the full aspect, you can just go, you can go back in time from that side. And then good. Finally, there is our pro services do provide, like as a paid service, like a threat hunting course. So this is something that is actually virtual classroom facing, where the instructor goes through in a day how you go through from start to finish to investigate a threat and respond to that threat, and really hands-on very much from that side. It's available to both customers and partners, but it is a paid for course at the moment from that side. It's because of the fact of the resources that we're putting together from that side. That's where it's aligned to. So really should probably suggest partners to stick to the threat hunting academy. But if you've got customers that are wanting to get their hands dirty, I would definitely recommend that they take on that aspect, the threat hunting course that's available through Pro Services.
That's really good, actually. I didn't know that was something that you guys offered, and a super good avenue for upskilling and enabling all the customers out there that you partners might have who have these kind of questions, and that leads you to get them upskilled and of course sticking to you as a partner and doing all the customer service and the skills courses that you have. But that's about it for the questions on our side. And as you guys, as everyone on the audience would know, if you have any more questions, you are more than welcome to contact contact Sophos at bluechipit.com.au. I do believe we have just a few more slides, just to finish up and get the consensus about, our XDR and inside of the landscape. Let's keep going from there. If I just switch over to the next slide, it's we're taking a bit of a zoom out right now, and just trying to make sure this works here. Cool. Right.
Yeah.
It's all about endpoint. Yeah, and MDR right now. Bryan, if you wanted to take the lead on this conversation.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think everyone today would be sort of like, I would say by default would probably be at the what we call the endpoint protection, where and everything's led by best protection, but you're at this fork in the road if you're delivering this as selling it as a solution for customers or wrapping it as a MSP monthly delivering. Are you going to do this yourself from that side? So I know I showed you a deep dive as to doing it yourself from that side, and the capabilities are there. But as you saw, as opposed to having this sort of like, I guess, this misnomer of sort of like set and forget, we're doing additional time, additional hands on keyboards. And so you really need to be mindful to say, okay, well, do I actually have the resources and do I actually have the skill set to utilize this all the time? And in particular, threat landscape's not a 9-to-5 job on that side. It really is a 24-hour service. And as we sort of talked about with the phishing attempt that, we spoke about with Uber or any of these other aspects from cookie stealing on that side, what is happening out of hours. And that really, I think, hopefully you get a bit of a feel as to it may be worth to stick to what you're doing at the protection layer on that side, as in using that as your baseline to say, I'm delivering this and maintaining it, but I'm going to subscribe to MTR and let MTR do the SecOps for you. And even if it comes through to sort of say, okay, I need to do this lookup for log4j, or I need to validate this vulnerability status at a proactive nature, you've got those resources that you can go and say, hey, help me out here, and they'll do that for you from that. That really is kind of would be my summary for today. It's like, yes, we've got a very, very powerful tool, but do you have the resources, as in the time, to go and put good use to it? Is it better off just getting it done, by us as an additional managed service?
No, absolutely, Bryan. I agree. I was talking to a previous business owner, a partner who used to, own a really large. He was a large Sophos partner, and when he looked at the implications of XDR and basically the time that you have to spend on threat hunting, and like you said, hands on keyboards and time glued to a screen investigating all these investigations, in the case that they're not trained to do so and they don't have the expertise, it takes a while to get up there, and that's still headcount and that's still time consumed doing something that's not making money for the business. For example, if you truly believe that you don't have the resources, or rather you feel like you're lacking in, you want someone else to cover for you while you offer this type of service, I believe that MTR, is out there in the case that you wanted to do that. Especially when you had the on the example, the demo you had of the OODA loop that was templated and that the MTR team addressed themselves. You mentioned that was that's something that the MTR team basically do for you. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's how they're following through the triaging, and that's how they're coming up to the conclusion to say, well, is this malicious activity, or is it suspicious activity, or is it insider or external on that side? And if they can't come to that conclusion, it's back to the top. Yep.
Absolutely. So it's a completely transparent process. It's very detailed, and it's very succinct. So it's really good that you can see that, especially inside of the XDR tool, and of course coming on to the MTR team. But that's really about it. I think if we just switch over, let's recap, let's finish up, Bryan, and let's get on out of here to lunch after you talk about this.
No, let's all hit lunch, everyone. It's my stomach's rumbling. So as we talked about, I used InceptX as a default. I'm saying, well, this is best protection. And then we pivoted across to XDR to validate what InceptX had picked up to give that full ecosystem to say, okay, are we actually protected, or is there additional threats that have gone through unnoticed? And really, from the time and effort that we went through in this demo, like really deep dive, quick, linear process, the real question comes to saying, well, do I have the resources, and is that worthy of us saying, well, maybe jumping across from the endpoint that's providing best protection, go across to MTR, MDR from that side. That really is the crux of what I wanted to do today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bryan. Look, I think that's about it. I'm gonna switch over just to the questions and answers that have been done. I don't think there's any more questions from our audience. You've done such a great job for us today. I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone here has learned as much as well. Thank you for joining, and once again, thank you for giving us all of that amazing expertise, Bryan.
No problems. Thank you again for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do it. And I think it was a great topic that we've gone through today. So I hope everyone got value from that.
Awesome. If anyone has any questions, you're more than happy to contact Sophos at bluechipit.com.au or me personally. I'm sure you guys have all talked to me at some point, or our partners. Let us know what you have going on there inside of the space, and we'll be happy to help you out. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and have a good one.
Bye-bye.